I should have known my perfectly ordered life was about to collapse the moment I walked into that cooking club. The day had been brutal. 3 showings, 2 difficult clients, and 1 spectacular waste of time with buyers who had champagne tastes and beer budgets. My feet ached in designer heels as I pushed through the glass doors of Sahara Community Center, following the scent of garlic and herbs down a fluorescent-lit hallway. "You made it." Elena's warm voice greeted me as I entered the industrial kitchen. "We're starting with paella tonight." I surveyed the room. 8 stations, 7 occupied by locals I vaguely recognized. The 8th station housed a woman I'd never seen before. She stood with her back to me, dark brown hair pulled into a practical bun, wearing a simple white blouse that somehow looked elegant despite the utilitarian setting. Her hands moved with surgical precision as she arranged what appeared to be miniature tools alongside the standard cooking implements. "Kylie, meet Margaret," Elena announced. "Margaret, this is Kylie, our newest member." When Margaret turned, I felt something shift in my chest. Green eyes studied me with an intensity that made my breath catch. Not judgment exactly. More like she was calculating measurements, assessing angles. "Real estate, right?" Her voice carried a slight rasp, like she'd spent years whispering secrets. "Guilty as charged." I managed a smile. "And you're clearly not from around here." "Architectural model maker, just moved from Portland." She gestured to her tools. "Old habits." Elena clapped her hands. "Enough chatting. Saffron waits for no one." The next hour passed in a haze of rice and seafood. Margaret proved to be a patient teacher when I confessed my complete ignorance about proper saffron measurement. "It's about precision," she said, standing close enough that I caught her scent, something clean and understated, like cedar and rain. "Too little and you lose the essence, too much and you overpower everything else." Her fingers brushed mine as she guided the measuring spoon. The contact lasted maybe 2 seconds, but heat traveled up my arm like I'd touched a live wire. "Like that?" I managed. "Perfect." When class ended, we lingered as others filed out. Margaret methodically packed her tools while I pretended to clean my station. "Same time next week?" she asked. "Wouldn't miss it." At the door, she surprised me by leaning in for what I assumed would be a handshake. Instead, she pressed a soft kiss to my cheek. "Welcome to Sahara, Kylie Williams." Before I could respond, she was gone, leaving me standing in the parking lot with the taste of saffron still on my lips and questions I wasn't ready to answer burning in my throat. I drove home through desert streets lined with palm trees and neon, my reflection in the rearview mirror showing flushed cheeks and eyes that sparkled with something dangerous. Something that felt suspiciously like possibility. 3 weeks into our cooking club routine, I found myself checking my phone every Tuesday, counting hours until I could see Margaret's steady hands work magic with ingredients I'd never heard of. "You're distracted," David observed during our morning meeting. "That Henderson property won't sell itself." He was right. I'd been replaying conversations about risotto techniques, when I should have been focusing on square footage and school districts. "Just tired," I lied, shuffling through listing photos. The Henderson property was a nightmare. Overpriced penthouse, with a view of the casino district that screamed money but whispered desperation. 3 months on the market, 0 serious offers. That afternoon, inspiration struck with the force of desert lightning. "Want to see something interesting?" I texted Margaret. Her response came within minutes. Always. 20 minutes later, she stood in the Henderson penthouse foyer, those green eyes scanning the space with professional intensity. I watched her move through rooms, noting how she paused at corners, testing sight lines. "The kitchen island's wrong," she said finally. "What do you mean?" "It creates a barrier. See how it cuts the space?" She gestured with those precise hands. "And the master bedroom window, it faces west. Afternoon heat's going to be brutal." I stared at flaws I'd somehow missed despite months of showings. "You see all that just by looking? Architecture's my language." She ran her palm along the granite countertop. "This place is beautiful, but it doesn't understand itself." We settled on the living room couch with a bottle of wine I'd liberated from the cellar's collection. Outside, Sahara's neon jungle pulsed against approaching dusk. "Why real estate?" Margaret asked, curling her legs beneath her. Control, I suppose. I like matching people with spaces that fit their lives. I sipped the wine, feeling it warm my chest. What about you? Why tiny buildings? Same reason, different scale. Her smile held secrets. I create worlds people can hold in their hands, perfect little universes where everything has its place. The way she said it made something tighten low in my stomach. I set down my wine glass, suddenly aware of how close we were sitting. Margaret. I need to tell you something. She tilted her head, waiting. I've been thinking about you. A lot. The words hung in air, thick with possibility. Margaret's pupils dilated in the dim light from the floor lamps. That's dangerous, she whispered. Why? Because I've been thinking about you too. Time slowed as she leaned closer, her breath warm against my lips. When she kissed me, it wasn't the tentative brush from the cooking club. This was deliberate, hungry, full of weeks of accumulated tension. Her mouth tasted like wine and promises. I threaded my fingers through her hair, feeling the careful bun come undone. Kylie, she breathed against my neck. Yeah? This complicates things. I pulled back to study her face. Good things or bad things? I don't know yet. Her honesty made my heart race. No games, no pretense. Just raw truth delivered with the same precision she applied to everything else. Then let's find out, I said, and kissed her again. This time she didn't hold back. Her hands found the hem of my blouse, and I arched into her touch. The Henderson penthouse, with all its flaws and broken sight lines, suddenly felt like the most perfect place on earth. 2 weeks after the Henderson penthouse kiss, I found a package on my doorstep that changed everything. The box was small, wrapped in brown paper with my name written in Margaret's distinctive architectural lettering. No return address, just the faint scent of cedar that I'd come to associate with her presence. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, sat the most exquisite miniature house I'd ever seen. Every detail was perfect, from the tiny shingles to the microscopic doorknob. It was my dream house, the one I'd described during our late-night conversations, rendered in perfect scale. A note card lay beneath, blueprints for the future. Some things are worth building carefully. M. My hands trembled as I lifted the delicate structure. She'd spent hours on this, maybe days. The windows were real glass, the siding textured wood. She'd even included the wraparound porch I'd mentioned wanting. I called her immediately. Did you get it? Her voice carried nervous anticipation. Margaret, this is incredible. You made this? Do you like it? Like it? I love it. I can't believe you remembered every detail. Silence stretched between us. Then, quietly, I remember everything you tell me, Kylie. Something in her tone made my pulse quicken. Are you free tonight? I was hoping you'd ask. Her apartment was a revelation. Clean lines, exposed brick, and dozens of architectural models displayed like tiny cities on custom shelves. She answered the door in jeans and a soft sweater that made her eyes look impossibly green. Welcome to my world, she said, gesturing to the miniature landscapes. We ended up on her balcony with wine and takeout Thai food, the model house sitting between us like a promise. The Nevada desert stretched beyond the city limits, stars emerging as daylight faded. Tell me about this one, I said, pointing to an elaborate Victorian mansion on the nearby shelf. Client in Portland wanted to surprise his wife, replica of their honeymoon bed and breakfast. Margaret's fingers traced the tiny widow's walk. Took me 3 months. He never paid the final invoice. Bastard. Yeah, well. His loss became my favorite piece. We talked until midnight about dreams deferred and chances taken. Margaret told me about leaving Portland after a relationship ended badly, how she'd chosen Sahara for its emptiness, its lack of complications. And then you walked into cooking club, she said, refilling our glasses. Complicating things? Absolutely. The wine had made us bold. When Margaret leaned over to point out a constellation, I didn't move away. Her proximity was intoxicating. The warmth radiating from her skin, the way moonlight caught the curve of her neck. Kylie, she whispered, not pulling back. I want to show you something. She led me inside to her bedroom, where another model sat on the nightstand. A perfect replica of the Henderson penthouse, complete with the flawed kitchen island we'd discussed. You made this too? I fix things in miniature first. It helps me understand the problems. She turned to face me, eyes serious. But some things can't be fixed, only accepted. What are we accepting here, Margaret? Instead of answering, she kissed me. This time there was no hesitation, no overthinking. Her hands found the hem of my shirt and pulled it over my head with deliberate slowness. I reached for her sweater, needing to feel skin against skin. We moved together with surprising synchronization, as if we'd choreographed this moment weeks ago. Her touch was reverent, exploratory, mapping my body with the same attention to detail she applied to her models. I responded by memorizing the sound of her breath catching when I kissed the hollow of her throat. The miniature penthouse watched from the nightstand as we discovered each other in moonlight filtered through gauze curtains. Margaret whispered my name like a prayer, and I understood that whatever was happening between us had moved far beyond simple attraction. Afterward, we lay tangled in sheets that smelled like her shampoo, my head on her shoulder while she traced lazy patterns on my bare arm. The future's scary, she murmured into the darkness. Good thing we have blueprints. Her laugh vibrated through her chest. Smart woman. I learned from the best. We fell asleep planning imaginary rooms and very real possibilities. The Meridian Casino deal dropped into my lap on a Wednesday, courtesy of David's manic grin and a stack of contracts thick enough to choke a horse. This is it, Kylie. The big league. He spread blueprints across my desk like a general planning invasion. $40 million commercial complex. If we land this, we're set for life. I stared at the numbers, feeling excitement and dread war in my chest. The commission alone would buy me that dream house Margaret had miniaturized. But the timeline was brutal. 6 weeks to close, which meant goodbye to cooking classes and hello to 14-hour days. When do we start? I heard myself say. 3 days later, I was drowning. Site visits, financing meetings, zoning hearings that stretched past midnight. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from Margaret that I answered with increasingly brief responses. Can't make cooking tonight. Sorry. Stuck in another meeting. Call you tomorrow. Miss you too. Work's crazy. On Thursday, I forgot to call at all. Meanwhile, Margaret was fighting her own war across town. The Luxor Hotel had commissioned her to create a scale model of their new tower expansion. 3 months of work compressed into 6 weeks because some marketing executive had changed his mind about the presentation date. I found this out secondhand when Elena mentioned Margaret had been working until 3 a.m. every night, surviving on coffee and determination. She looks exhausted, Elena said after another missed cooking class. You two having problems? Just bad timing. But timing felt like everything. Every moment I spent analyzing profit margins was a moment I wasn't watching Margaret's precise hands transform raw materials into tiny miracles. Every late-night conference call was another evening we couldn't spend planning imaginary futures on her balcony. The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening. I'd promised Margaret I'd pick up dinner and come straight to her place after my last appointment. Instead, I got trapped in a 3-hour nightmare with Meridian's lawyers, arguing about liability clauses and easement rights. When I finally arrived at Margaret's apartment at nearly 10 o'clock, she was standing in her kitchen surrounded by the aftermath of what appeared to be a culinary disaster. Flour dusted every surface, and something that might once have been soufflé sat collapsed in a baking dish. I tried to make dinner, she said without looking up. Thought I could surprise you. The defeat in her voice cut through my exhaustion like a blade. Margaret, I'm sorry. The lawyers wouldn't let me leave and... It's fine. It's not fine. Look at this mess. She finally met my eyes, and I saw something there I'd never seen before. Not anger, something worse. Resignation. The soufflé fell 20 minutes after it was supposed to come out of the oven, she said quietly. Just like everything else lately. What's that supposed to mean? When did we stop talking, Kylie? When did we become people who communicate through text messages and rain checks? The question hit harder than I expected. It's temporary. Once this deal closes, there's always going to be another deal. And there's always going to be another model for you to build. The words came out sharper than I intended. Margaret flinched like I'd slapped her. That's different. How? Because my work doesn't make me disappear from my own life. We stared at each other across the flour-dusted kitchen, the miniature house she'd built for me sitting on the counter like an accusation. Everything felt brittle, ready to collapse under the weight of unspoken frustrations. I should go, I said finally. Yeah. Maybe you should. I made it halfway to the door before turning back. Margaret hadn't moved, still standing among the ruins of her attempted surprise. This isn't how I wanted tonight to go, I said. I know. I miss you. I miss you too. For a moment, it felt like we might find our way back to each other. Then my phone buzzed with another message from David, and Margaret saw me glance at it. Go, she said. Your other life is calling. I walked out into the desert night feeling like I'd just made the biggest mistake of my life, but too proud and too tired to turn around and fix it. Margaret's phone call came at 6:30 on a Friday morning, her voice hollow with the kind of grief that strips away everything except raw truth. She's gone. I sat up in bed, instantly awake. Who's gone? Sarah, my sister. Car accident outside Los Angeles. A pause filled with static and pain. I have to go clean out her house. The funeral's Tuesday. We hadn't spoken properly in 2 weeks, not since the souffle disaster. The Meridian deal had consumed me completely, leaving room for nothing else. But hearing Margaret break apart over the phone line dissolved every ounce of professional ambition in my body. I'm coming with you. Kylie, you don't have to. I'm coming. 6 hours later, we were driving through the Mojave Desert in Margaret's Honda, heading toward a grief neither of us was prepared to face. She'd barely spoken since I'd shown up at her apartment with an overnight bag, just nodded when I took the passenger seat. The house in Santa Monica was a craftsman bungalow painted the color of seafoam, with a garden that had clearly been someone's pride and joy. Sarah had lived alone for 15 years, Margaret explained as we stood on the front porch, keys trembling in her hand. We weren't close, she said. Hadn't talked in 3 years. Why not? Long story. The interior was frozen in time, floral wallpaper, overstuffed furniture, and photographs covering every available surface. But what struck me immediately was how organized everything was, as if Sarah had been preparing for someone to go through her belongings. Margaret moved through rooms like a sleepwalker, picking up objects and setting them down without really seeing them. I started in the kitchen, boxing dishes and sorting through cabinets that revealed an obsession with cooking magazines and exotic spices. She loved to cook, Margaret said, appearing in the doorway. Always sending me recipes I never tried. That's when I found it, a wooden recipe box tucked behind a collection of vintage cookbooks, the kind of box that held family secrets and handwritten treasures. I was about to call Margaret over when I noticed the envelope wedged beneath the recipe cards. My name was written on it in handwriting I didn't recognize. With shaking fingers, I pulled out a letter dated 3 months ago, addressed to Kylie Williams in careful script. My dearest Kylie, it began. If you're reading this, then Margaret has finally found her way to you, just as I always hoped she would. The world tilted sideways. I kept reading, each sentence unwinding reality thread by thread. Sarah wrote about watching Margaret build models for hours, talking about a woman she'd met at cooking class, about how Margaret's whole face would light up when she described my laugh, my terrible knife skills, my stubborn refusal to admit defeat with difficult recipes. But it was the final paragraph that stopped my heart completely. I want you to know that you made me proud, Kylie. Proud of the woman you became after we parted ways at Berkeley. I never told Margaret about our time together because I was a coward, but I always hoped you'd find the love I was too afraid to give you. Please don't let my mistakes shadow what you and my sister have found. Some connections are worth fighting for, even when the timing feels impossible. The letter was signed with love and regret, Sarah Baker. My legs gave out. I sank into one of Sarah's kitchen chairs, the letter fluttering to the linoleum floor. Margaret appeared instantly, drawn by the sound of my collapse. What's wrong? I gestured helplessly at the letter. She picked it up, her green eyes scanning the page with growing confusion that slowly transformed into something approaching horror. You knew Sarah? she whispered. College, Berkeley. We dated for 8 months senior year. Dated. She broke up with me right before graduation. Said she couldn't handle what people would think, what her family would say. I looked up at Margaret's pale face. She never mentioned having a sister. Margaret stared at the letter like it might bite her. She wrote this 3 months ago. She knew about us. She knew we were together before we knew we were together. The kitchen felt too small, the air too thick. Margaret leaned against the counter, processing information that rewrote the entire foundation of what we thought we knew. Is that why? She asked finally. Is that why you were interested in me? Because I reminded you of her? The question hit like a physical blow. No, Margaret, no. I didn't even know you were related until right now. But you loved her. I thought I did. But what we had was nothing like what I feel for you. Margaret closed her eyes. When she opened them again, they were bright with unshed tears. How do I know that's true? I didn't have an answer that wouldn't sound like a justification or a lie. The silence in Sarah's kitchen stretched between us like a chasm. Margaret stood frozen against the counter, clutching the letter that had just detonated our carefully constructed world. Tell me about her, she said finally, her voice carefully controlled. I took a shaky breath. We met in Professor Chen's art history class. Sarah was studying literature, writing her thesis on Virginia Woolf. She was brilliant, funny, but terrified of what loving me meant. What happened? She panicked. 3 weeks before graduation, she said she couldn't do it anymore. Couldn't hold my hand in public, couldn't bring me home to meet her family. Said she needed to figure out who she was without the complication of being with another woman. Margaret's knuckles were white where she gripped the counter. Did you fight for her? I tried. But you can't fight someone's fear of themselves. I picked at a loose thread on Sarah's tablecloth. She asked me not to contact her after graduation. Said it would be easier for both of us. And you just accepted that? The accusation in her tone made me look up sharply. What was I supposed to do? Force her to love me openly? I don't know. Margaret's eyes were bright with pain. Maybe. She walked to the window overlooking Sarah's garden, her reflection ghost-like in the glass. Did you ever look for her, after college? Once, about 5 years ago, I found her address online. Almost drove here. I joined her at the window. But what would I have said? Hi, remember me? The woman whose love scared you so much you had to disappear? Maybe she would have been ready then. Maybe. Or maybe she would have slammed the door in my face. Margaret turned to face me, and I saw she was crying. Not the dramatic sobs of movie heartbreak, just quiet tears tracking down her cheeks. I need to understand something, she whispered. When you look at me, do you see her? The question I'd been dreading since finding the letter. Sometimes I wondered why I felt so comfortable with you so quickly, I admitted. But Margaret, what I feel for you is completely different. Bigger, more real. How can you be sure? Because Sarah made me feel like I was asking too much just by existing. You make me feel like I'm exactly enough. She studied my face like she was trying to decode a blueprint. But she's why you found me, isn't she? Some cosmic joke. Dead sister leads ex-girlfriend to lonely sibling. Stop it. It's true though. If Sarah hadn't written that letter, if she hadn't been watching us from whatever afterlife she believed in. Margaret. I reached for her hands, but she pulled away. You're spiraling. Am I? Because from where I'm standing, this feels like the universe's cruelest punchline. The woman I'm falling in love with used to love my dead sister, who apparently spent her last months playing matchmaker from beyond the grave. Her words hit like artillery fire. Falling in love with? She laughed bitterly. Wrong time to mention that, huh? Perfect time. I stepped closer, refusing to let her retreat. Because I'm falling in love with you too. Not Sarah's sister, not some echo of my college girlfriend. You. How do I believe that? Before I could answer, she was walking away, disappearing into Sarah's living room. I found her standing in front of a wall of photographs, studying images of a life neither of us had been part of. Look at this, Margaret said, pointing to a picture of Sarah at what appeared to be a beach wedding. She looks happy, really happy. The photo showed Sarah in a blue sundress, arms around an older woman with graying hair and kind eyes. Both women wore matching rings. "She found someone," I whispered. "Her partner, Linda. They were together 12 years. Margaret's voice was hollow. Sarah was out, just not to family. More photographs revealed the same pattern. Sarah and Linda at dinner parties, on vacation, building what looked like a rich, full life together. A life Sarah had been too frightened to imagine when we were 22. "She grew up," I said. "Yeah, without us." Margaret picked up another photo, this one showing Sarah in a kitchen identical to the one where we'd been standing. She was laughing at something outside the camera's frame, flower in her dark hair, looking genuinely joyful. "This is who she became after you," Margaret said. "Someone who could love without fear." "Margaret, what if that's what this is?" She turned to face me, eyes bright with desperate logic. "What if you're not meant to be with me? What if you're meant to become who Sarah became, someone who can love openly, completely, but with someone else?" The suggestion felt like losing my balance on a cliff edge. "Is that what you want?" I asked. "I want to trust that what we have is real." "Then trust it." "I don't know how." We stood in Sarah's living room, surrounded by evidence of a life we'd never known, both of us drowning in questions that had no clean answers. Outside, California sunshine mocked the darkness we'd discovered in a kitchen recipe box. "We should go," Margaret said finally. "I can't think clearly here." The 3-hour drive back to Nevada passed in tense silence, both of us lost in thoughts too dangerous to speak aloud. The weeks after Sarah's house felt like living in separate bubbles that occasionally drifted close enough to touch before floating apart again. Margaret buried herself in her models with obsessive intensity, creating increasingly elaborate miniature worlds, while I drowned in meridian paperwork that no longer felt important. My calls went straight to voicemail. The cooking club felt hollow without her presence. Elena's concerned glances following me as I fumbled through recipes Margaret could have perfected in her sleep. "She hasn't been coming either," Elena mentioned during a particularly disastrous attempt at beef bourguignon. "Whatever happened between you two, fix it." "But how do you fix something built on a foundation that might be quicksand?" I started leaving gifts at Margaret's workshop door. Small things. Her favorite coffee from the roastery downtown, a book about Frank Lloyd Wright I'd seen her admire, a miniature succulent in a pot the size of a thimble. Never a note, never a demand for acknowledgement, just evidence that I was thinking about her. 3 weeks into our Cold War, I signed the Meridian contracts. David popped champagne in our conference room while I stared out the window, feeling like I'd won a race I no longer cared about running. "You should celebrate," he said, refilling my glass. "This commission will change your life." "Yeah," I managed. "Life-changing." That night, I drove to Margaret's apartment building and sat in my car for 2 hours, watching her workshop window glow with warm light. Through the glass, I could see her silhouette bent over a workbench, those precise hands shaping tiny dreams, while I sat in the darkness wondering how we'd gotten so lost. The call came from Elena at 11:15 on a Thursday night, her voice tight with worry. "There's been an accident at the community center. Water main break in the kitchen. I need help salvaging what we can before everything's ruined." I threw on clothes and raced across town, my heart hammering with the irrational fear that Margaret might be there, might be hurt. The parking lot was empty, except for Elena's sedan, and a maintenance truck. Inside, the kitchen was chaos. Water covered the floor, and Elena was frantically moving equipment to higher surfaces with tears streaming down her face. 15 years I've been teaching here," she said without preamble. "All my recipes, my equipment, everything's going to be destroyed." I grabbed towels from the supply closet and started mopping, trying to create dry islands around the most expensive appliances. That's when I heard footsteps in the hallway. Margaret appeared in the doorway wearing pajama pants and a Georgetown sweatshirt, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. Our eyes met across the flooded kitchen, and time seemed to pause. "Elena called," she said simply. Of course she did. Without discussion, we fell into the rhythm of crisis management. Margaret's organizational skills proved invaluable as we triaged equipment and supplies, moving everything salvageable to the backup classroom down the hall. We worked in careful synchronization, speaking only when necessary, but our bodies remembered how to move around each other. 2 hours later, we'd managed to save most of Elena's precious tools and recipe collection. She hugged us both with tears of gratitude before heading home to deal with insurance companies. Margaret and I stood in the hallway outside the ruined kitchen, suddenly aware that we were alone together for the first time since California. "Thank you," I said, "for coming. Elena's important to both of us. So are we." The words hung in the fluorescent-lit space between us. Margaret's green eyes searched my face, and I saw the same exhaustion and longing I felt reflected there. "Kylie?" "I miss you," I interrupted. "I miss talking to you about everything and nothing. I miss watching your hands create tiny miracles. I miss falling asleep next to you and waking up in your arms." "It's not that simple." "Why not?" "Because every time I look at you, I wonder if you're seeing her instead of me." I stepped closer, close enough to catch her familiar cedar scent. "Then let me show you what I see." Before she could protest, I cupped her face in my hands, forcing her to meet my gaze. "I see the woman who spent days building me a dream house because I mentioned wanting a wraparound porch. I see someone who notices architectural flaws I'm too distracted to catch. I see the most beautiful hands I've ever watched work." My thumbs traced her cheekbones. "I see you, Margaret Baker. Not Sarah's sister. Not an echo of my past. You." Her resolve cracked visibly. "How can you be sure?" "Because Sarah made me feel like I had to hide parts of myself to be loved. You make me want to be more honest, braver, better. That's not the same feeling, sweetheart. That's not even close." The endearment slipped out naturally, and I watched it hit her like a physical touch. "Say it again," she whispered. "Sweetheart." This time, when I leaned in to kiss her, she didn't pull away. Her lips were soft and familiar, tasting like hope and second chances. When we broke apart, both of us were breathing hard. "I've been miserable without you," she admitted. "Good. I'd hate to suffer alone." Her laugh was watery but genuine. "We're terrible at this. We're learning." She kissed me again, longer this time, her hands fisting in my shirt, like she was afraid I might disappear. In the empty hallway of a community center at 1 a.m, surrounded by the smell of industrial floor cleaner and Elena's rescued spice collection, we found our way back to each other. Rebuilding trust felt like learning to walk again after a broken bone. Tentative steps, testing weight, waiting for the pain that might or might not come. Margaret spent the weekend at my apartment, both of us moving carefully around the emotional landmines we'd planted during our separation. Sunday morning found us in my kitchen, attempting Elena's rescued soufflé recipe as a peace offering to the universe. "Easy with the eggs," Margaret murmured, standing behind me with her arms loosely circled around my waist. "They need to breathe." Having her close again felt like coming home after years of exile. I leaned back against her warmth, savoring the simple pleasure of synchronized breathing. "I have something for you," I said when the soufflé was safely in the oven. "More gifts?" "You've been spoiling my workshop door." "This is different." I pulled the deed from my briefcase, hands trembling slightly as I placed it on the counter. Margaret's eyes widened as she read the address. "The Morrison Building downtown? Ground floor commercial space. 2,000 square feet." I tucked a strand of her hair behind her ear. "I thought maybe you could set up a proper gallery for your models. I could use the back office for client meetings. We could work in the same space without getting in each other's way." She stared at the papers like they might spontaneously combust. "Kylie, this building costs—" "The Meridian Commission covered it." I shrugged, trying for casual despite my racing pulse. "Consider it an investment in our future." "Our future. If you want one." Margaret set down the deed and turned to face me fully, her green eyes impossibly serious. "What happened with Sarah sitting between us changed things." My heart stuttered. "Changed them how?" "It made me realize I've been holding back, protecting myself from getting hurt." She reached for my hands. "But watching you fight for us, even when I was pushing you away, showed me something important." "What?" "You're not Sarah. You don't run when things get complicated. You show up with solutions and stubborn determination, and more patience than I deserve." The oven timer chose that moment to chime. We both ignored it. "The soufflé," I started. "Let it fall," Margaret said firmly. "Some things are more important than perfect timing." She kissed me then, soft and deep and full of promises we were finally brave enough to make. When we broke apart, she was smiling through tears. I love you, Kylie Williams. Not because you knew my sister, not because of cosmic coincidences or posthumous matchmaking. I love you because you're exactly who you are. Even when I'm workaholic who misses dinner dates, especially then, someone has to keep you fed. The burnt souffle was forgotten as she led me to the bedroom, her fingers already working at the buttons of my shirt. This time there was no hesitation, no shadow of the past hanging between us. Just two women who'd found their way back to each other through honesty and hope. Her touch was reverent, mapping familiar territory with renewed appreciation. I responded by memorizing the sound of her name on my lips, the way she arched beneath my hands, the soft sighs that escaped when I kissed the hollow of her throat. We moved together with desperate tenderness, making up for weeks of separation in whispered confessions and gentle urgency. Afterward, we lay tangled in sheets that smelled like her shampoo, my head on her shoulder while desert, sunlight painted patterns on the wall. About the building, she said, tracing lazy circles on my bare arm. Having second thoughts? Just one question. Do we get to keep the miniature house? I lifted my head to study her face, noting the mischief in her green eyes. It comes with the girlfriend, package deal. In that case, I accept. Which part? All of it. The building, the partnership, the girlfriend who leaves tiny succulents on my doorstep. She brushed a kiss against my temple. Especially the girlfriend. 3 months later, Baker Williams Design occupied the Morrison Building's prime corner space. Margaret's architectural models displayed like jewelry in custom-lit cases, while I closed deals in an office that smelled like cedar and possibility. The burnt souffle had been replaced by dozens of successful recipes, each one a small victory against the kitchen disasters that had marked our early attempts at domestic harmony. We still attended Elena's cooking classes, though now we shared a station and argued about seasoning with the comfortable familiarity of couples who'd learned to fight fair. The miniature dream house sat on Margaret's desk at the gallery, no longer a blueprint for the future but a reminder of how far we'd traveled to find each other. Sometimes clients would notice it and ask about the craftsmanship, not knowing they were admiring a love letter built to scale. It's perfect, Margaret would tell them, and I'd catch her eye from across the room, understanding that she meant more than just the tiny architecture. We were perfect too, in our imperfect, complicated, beautifully human way. 6 months after opening Baker Williams Design, I woke up to find Margaret missing from our bed and the smell of something burning drifting from the kitchen. Please tell me you're not attempting breakfast again, I called, padding barefoot across the cold hardwood floors of our new apartment above the gallery. Worse, her voice floated back. I'm attempting a proposal. I stopped dead in the doorway. Margaret stood at the stove, wearing nothing but my Georgetown t-shirt and a look of determined concentration, stirring what appeared to be scrambled eggs with one hand while holding a tiny velvet box with the other. Margaret Baker, are you proposing to me while half naked and burning breakfast? The eggs aren't burning, they're caramelizing. She turned off the heat and faced me fully, the morning light from our kitchen window making her green eyes sparkle with nervous energy. And technically, I'm proposing while half-dressed and successfully preparing breakfast. My heart hammered against my ribs as she approached, the small box held out like an offering. This isn't how I planned it, she said softly. I had this whole elaborate scheme involving the cooking club, Elena's best wine, and a perfectly timed souffle that wouldn't fall. What changed your mind? I woke up next to you this morning and realized I was tired of planning perfect moments instead of living in the perfectly imperfect ones we already have. She opened the box to reveal not a traditional ring but something uniquely Margaret, a delicate band embedded with tiny architectural blueprints, the metal polished to mirror brightness. I had it custom made, she explained, suddenly shy. The blueprints are from famous buildings designed by female architects. I thought you might like the symbolism. I stared at the ring, overwhelmed by how perfectly it captured everything about us. Artistry and structure, tradition and innovation, small details that added up to something magnificent. Kylie Williams, Margaret said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. Will you marry me? Will you let me build a life with you that's as beautiful and complicated and wonderfully imperfect as we are? The answer had been yes, from the moment she'd guided my hands through saffron measurements 9 months ago. Yes, from the first time she'd kissed my cheek in a community center parking lot. Yes, through every fight, every reconciliation, every morning I'd woken up grateful to find her beside me. But instead of speaking, I crossed the kitchen in 3 quick steps and kissed her with enough force to back her against the refrigerator, the ring box still clutched between us. "Is that a yes?" she gasped when we broke apart. "That's a hell yes." She slipped the ring onto my finger with shaking hands, both of us laughing when it stuck at my knuckle before sliding into place. It fit perfectly, of course. Margaret never got measurements wrong. "I love you," I whispered against her lips. "Even when I wake you up with marriage proposals and burnt breakfast?" "Especially then." 3 hours later, we stood in Elena's reconstructed cooking club kitchen, surrounded by friends who'd become family over months of shared meals and terrible kitchen disasters. Elena had insisted on hosting our impromptu engagement celebration, pulling out her best champagne and the fancy place settings usually reserved for holidays. David brought flowers from his own garden, grumbling about romantic nonsense while secretly wiping away tears. "To Baker Williams design," Elena toasted, raising her glass. "And to 2 women who proved that the best recipes can't be planned, only discovered." As we clinked glasses, I caught Margaret's eye across the table. She was radiant in the afternoon light, her engagement ring catching the overhead bulbs as she gestured through another story about architectural disasters. Later, after the champagne and congratulations and promises to help plan a proper wedding, we walked hand in hand through downtown Sahara, past the gallery where our miniature dreams had grown into reality. "No regrets?" Margaret asked as we stopped in front of our building, looking up at the warmly lit windows of our shared space. "Only one." Her smile faltered slightly. "What?" "I regret that it took us so long to stop being afraid of perfect timing and embrace perfect chaos." Relief flooded her features. "We can make up for lost time. Starting now?" "Starting now." She kissed me under the desert stars, tasting like champagne and promises, and the kind of future I'd stopped believing in before she taught me that some blueprints are worth waiting for. The miniature dream house watched from the gallery window as we climbed the stairs to our apartment, no longer a symbol of what might be, but a reminder of what we'd built together, something small and precious and absolutely perfect in its beautiful imperfection.